Welcome everyone to VMware Carbon Black office hours. We're going to go through some policies, best practice, and I'm definitely going to be getting into some unique real world examples. My name is Michael Rogers, and I am manager of solution engineering for the Northeast and South. I've been at Carbon Black over 5 years now, and I will turn it over to Ivan.
Hey, good morning, guys. My name is Ivan, and I'm part of the Carbon Black Specialist Group. I focus on the Latin America region. I've been in Carbon Black for 2 years now. Welcome once again.
So I know that we're going to have some polling questions. So what we're going to go ahead and do is let's go ahead and roll that first poll question, and we'll give you a little bit of time to answer that, and then we'll go ahead and kick things off with Ivan.
Thanks, Michael. And yeah, the first question is, how many policies do you have currently deployed in your environment? Let's see.
See, Ivan, I don't like it. It says host and panelists can't vote. So if I had to vote, I would say between 6 and 9. Simplicity at its best.
Yeah, I agree with you, Michael. But you know, sometimes you have to do some testing, and there's a lot of policies that you get stacked over and over. And when you go back to your console, you will see more than 10 or more than 20 policies, and you're only using like 3 or 4 of them. So yeah, that's a good check. So wow, yeah. And Michael, you were right. Have 38% of the audience that have between 6 and 9 policies.
Well, so, that's yeah, close though.
Yeah, right. Good. So let's move to the next poll. And let's see. Did you know you can test how a rule will affect your environment before applying it in a policy? It's a simple yes or no question. So
this was one of the greatest features and customer feedback items that we did.
Agree. The ability to see or to test how a rule can impact your organization, that's amazing. I mean, that's a huge improvement on how we can customize and avoid any unwanted blocking.
And you know, that also separates us from our competitors. So there looks like the poll says no. So Ivan, I will make sure to cover that before I start my section.
Awesome. That's great. Thanks, Michael. Thanks everybody for participating in this poll. So now let's move, and thank you once again for your your participation. I mean, if we can move to the next slide, please. Appreciate it. Seems like I cannot control it. Okay, so thank you. Now let's talk about our agenda. We'll first talk about what is Carbon Black's prevention approach. Then we'll move to one of the policies fundamentals. We'll talk about the monitor standard and advanced policies. Then some policy essentials, how a policy is, what are the different elements of a policy, and then we'll move to the best practices and pro tips. So before jumping to policies, best practices, let's talk about Carbon Black prevention approach. This is very important because before starting to setting a lot of policies, we first need to understand how Carbon Black prevention works. So first, we have the signature or the base detection technology. This is your typical AV signature prevention technology. VMware Carbon Black use signature-based prevention to eliminate the low-hanging fruit, which also ensures our compliance as a direct antivirus replacement under all compliance frameworks. We are also one of the very few next-gen AV products to be certified as an AV replacement by Microsoft and PCI. So now let's move to the next tier, and we'll talk about machine learning. So when we mention machine learning, a lot of things come through our minds, but machine learning is not that difficult to understand. Machine learning basically takes into consideration several characteristics of the file, such as what is the IP and the domain it's coming from, what tools it's interacting with, and what network or host artifacts are associated with it. So machine learning essentially builds an heuristic to define malicious files and block them when they match that heuristic. This is a very effective way to eliminate the unknown bad files of the world. From an attacker perspective, it is relatively easy to change the hash values or change the IP addresses and domain names regarding an attack. But one of the hardest things for an attacker is to change the fundamental behaviors an attack exhibits. And that's when Carbon Black event streaming processing comes into equation. So Carbon Black analyzes tactics, techniques, and procedures. I'm pretty sure most of you have seen the TTP acronym in the Carbon Black console. If you didn't know what TTP means, it's tactics, techniques, and procedures, which is another way of saying behaviors. And it applies prevention when those behaviors cross the line defined by our intelligence or by your organization policies. And streaming processing, or this behavior detection, is the best prevention technology for those advanced threats like living off the land attacks that use non-malware or use trusted applications. Okay, so those are the three different layers of Carbon Black prevention approach. So now that we have talked about prevention, let's talk about some of the basics of policies. So most of you know that by default, out of the box, Carbon Black has three policies. We have monitor, standard, and advanced. Let's talk about monitor first. So monitor is often referred to. This is a non-prevention policy. So when we deploy monitor, it will only feed or give us visibility on what malicious activity is happening, but no prevention controls are being applied. It will report on suspicious and malicious activity, and it is generally used to deploy Carbon Black on the mission critical systems where the uptime is crucial. So this is very important because when we're going to install Carbon Black on some critical systems, or if we're going to install Carbon Black on a system that it's currently using another security technology, we can start using monitor just to make sure everything is stable, everything is going fine, and we're avoiding any unwanted blocking. Now, let's move to standard. This is our special calibrate day one deployment option. It gives you a heavy degree of behavioral prevention, but minimize any false positives. This is the option organizations utilize to quickly install Carbon Black through their enterprise and replace traditional AV on day one of their respective deployments. This is usually in the base policy that we suggest you to start with. And of course, all machines that you deploy go to standard by default. So if you don't want, or if you want to avoid the use of a standard on some systems, I recommend you to create a group with the policy that you want to be like the base policy for your organization. Unless you have that group, that asset group, you will have the standard as your default policy. And then again, this is not a very restrictive policy, but it's a good way to start. You will have known malicious prevention, some unknown or like adware, PUP, or suspected files prevention, and also some not listed or some basic behaviors prevention. Lastly, we have the advanced policy. When we're talking about advanced, this is a very stringent policy, and most companies use the advanced policy as a hardening template. Generally, advanced is enabled after a brief soak period, so that we can see if any of the rules reading it will have an impact in the machines in scope. You should be careful with this policy applying to all your organization. It can trigger a lot of alerts, and it's not suited for everybody. We recommend that usually if you have a system that needs critical attention, you can, or if you suspect that you're under a security breach, probably move your most critical assets to an advanced policy. But then again, this is more for incident response activities or for troublemakers. Some machines that keep triggering a lot of alerts, there's probably some policy that need to be tuning. So yeah, this is more like a hardening policy, and it's recommended just for a very specific cases. Okay, very specific scenarios. So now that we talk about the default policies, let's see and let's talk what are the different pieces that make a policy. So first we have the general tab. When we talk about the general tab, we usually have the name, a brief description. Those are customizables, and we have the target value. I don't know if many of you have used the target value, or do you know what the target value is? But it basically is a multiplier when calculating the threat level for any threat detected on a particular device. We have different values, normal. We have low, normal, medium, and critical or high target value. So on a medium or normal, target value is the baseline, no multiplier. The low target value will result in a lower threat level, but high and critical targets will increase. So the threat level under the same circumstances can have different severity depending on the target value. I recommend this to be used very careful. Especially, it is very useful as a way to filter or as a way to organize or manage your devices. So if you have your data center or your critical assets with a low target value, you can probably be missing any alerts. So if you manage your devices based on that target value, it will help you to have a better visibility when you are reviewing your alerts. Now let's move to the prevention tab. So when we talk about prevention, there are different pieces of information that we have. First, we have permissions. Permissions is usually the bypass rules or the exception rules. It's important to understand that permissions take precedence over blocking and isolation rules. So if you set up any exception in that permission rule, and if you apply and you think you're applying one rule below in the blocking section, remember that the permission will precedence that blocking rule. So it's really important to make sure we are not allowing or we are not bypassing any critical path or file. And it's very important to understand what is the difference between allow and log, and bypass. So allow means that we will allow that specific behavior in the specific path. None of the specific behavior of the path is logged, and no data is sent to the Carbon Black backend. So if I just click allow, I won't send any data, and I won't see any data in the Carbon Black. Allow and log, this specify behavior and specify path. All activities logged and reported to the Carbon Black end. Lastly, bypass. All behavior is allowed and nothing is logged, and the data is sent to the Carbon Black backend. So it's very important not to go to bypass unless it's critical, because we're going to lose visibility on all the activity that we define in the application path. Talking about the application path, you can create different, or you can enter different kind of paths. You have the file notation. You will apply to a single file. You have directory prefix notation. This is a rule that will apply to all the files and folders that are under the directory prefix. And of course, you can use wildcard. You can use a single asterisk or double asterisk if you want to set up your your paths in the application paths text box. Now that we talked about permissions, let's move to the blocking and isolation section. So this is where your pre-built protection is located. As you can see, we have the basic prevention for non-malware. It's already set up. Most of the times, and this is important why we need to understand the difference of a standard and advanced, because all the known malware, all the known threats are located right here. As you can see, by default, the non-malware rule, it's already set up. And it's very important to understand that most of the times I have heard that why Carbon Black it's not detecting like when a file is been downloading or not. Remember, and this is very important, just read the rule. Will detect and will terminate the process when a non-malware is run or is running. So it's very important to understand at what point or which operation are we going to prevent. Of course, if you click on the little pencil that it's in the right corner of the screen, you will have the ability to edit the different permissions or the different actions. In the ban list, of course, you want to terminate that. We'll have prevention for unknown application or processes. We have protection for adware, PUP. PUP, for those who don't know, it stands for potential wanted program, suspect malware, and not listed application. This is where all the machine learning approach comes really handy, because we're using all that intelligence in Carbon Black Cloud, all that telemetry, to prevent those suspicious or unknown bad files. This is where it comes handy. Next, you have the ability to specify, and you can create behavioral rules. These are the more advanced rules, and usually this is where most of the users can create some potential unwanted blockings or a lot of alerts. And it's very simple. You have different behaviors that you want or you can block. Of course, we have run or is running. This means that when a process is operating on the endpoint, it will be deny or terminate. The difference between deny and terminate basically means that, for example, let's take the second row, the communicates over the network. If an Excel file tries to open some network communication, probably a link, if I click deny operation, the Excel file will keep running. If I choose terminate process, the service or the process will be killed. It's like right-clicking and close it, or go direct to the services, right-click and kill Excel process. So it's also important because it can cause some disruption based on how or what is the experience that you want to give to the end user. We have, I mentioned about the communicates over network. This is basically it tracks the network activity caused by the process. Scrapes or scraping. It's when a target tries to read the memory of a process. For example, LSAS executes code from memory. On target attempt to run code from a dynamic memory. Invoke and trust processes. We have an untrusted application that is accessed by the process. Command interpreter, basically attempt to use a shell like PowerShell, Python, script, performs like ransomware. This is very important. Carbon Black's ransomware detection, it's particularly when a file, it's tried to access one of our decoy files. I'm wondering if many of you are familiar with the canary files. The canary files are some decoy files that are created on very specific locations. So if you go to your C volume and you review, you will see a lot of files with very strange names. Those are the canary files. And when a ransomware or a file or some process tries to modify or delete those decoy files, that's when that ransomware-like behavior is triggered. Also, when a process is trying to write on the master boot or to access to volume shadow copy, those are also some of the actions that are triggered or that can trigger that ransomware-like behavior. Execute file as scripts. This is a process that use basically do living of the lab behavior, and of course injects and modify the memory of another process. That's some behaviors that you can prevent. So we also have the USB device blocking. Remember that you can have that every time an end user plugs a USB stick or a USB storage device, we added that to the USB inventory database. You will find that USB inventory database under your inventory tab, USB devices, and by default, all the USB devices are set to non-approved. You will need to manually approve that device unless if you check on that box, all the USB devices won't be allowed by default. Okay, and then you have the upload paths. Some certainly paths that are used to upload and where you can no upload information from. Now let's move to the local scan tab. Remember, Carbon Black, of course, can scan files. By default, the first time the Carbon Black sensor is installed, it will run a full scan, and after that, all the scans will be on access. What mean on access? Every time a user or a process invokes one file or application, it will be scanned. There are different scan modes. You have the disable, where you basically disable the scans. Normal, it will scan the file once, and if the hash does not change, it won't scan it again. And we have aggressive. Aggressive will basically scans the file every time it's invoked. We also have the signature updates windows, have the frequency. It's how often the sensor checks for signatures. And remember to always calculate how often the sensor will check. If we leave a wider window, we're probably start to miss some updates, and you're going to have outdated systems. So if you're seeing a lot of outdating signature systems, double check on your frequency, because probably it's wider and it's take too much or too long to double check or to check in for updates. And of course, the update servers. By default, we have the Carbon Black URL date signature update link, but you can create mirror servers if you want to update them locally. Lastly, we have the the sensor tab. This is where you can customize your sensor. You can display a message. You can allow the users to disable protection. This is basically, or I recommend they allow user to disable protection for some critical systems, or if you are doing some troubleshooting, unless don't allow it. The background scan, require code to install. This is very important. This is like tamper protection. The live response capabilities. I've been asked multiple times if or why users cannot use live response. It's because it's not turned on. So make sure to turn on the live response or to check the live response box in order to have that that feature enabled. Also, well, you have the ability to auto delete non-malware hashes, and this is one of those secrets that most users just ignore. That you can select the auto delete malware hashes after a certain time. You can select for some fixed times. The least is, I believe, 1 day, and the most or the longest is like a month, I think. And we do that because we want to avoid to erase any false positive file. And you can always keep track that on your Carbon Black console. You can also have that in the malware activities submenu. And finally, before jumping with Michael or going with Michael, I want to give you some pro tips. First, and Michael said it at the beginning, simplicity is the best. So starting standard, when the stability and usability are proven, move to more restrictive rules. Make sure to not be very restrictive at the beginning, unless you can cause a very bad experience for your end user. We always know that end users always are complying about security solutions. So let's take it, and first make sure that everything is stable, and then we can move to restrictive rules. Duplicate policy. This is always a good practice. Never, or the best practice is not to modify at least the pre-build of the out-of-the-box policies. Always duplicate and make the changes over there, and try not to do a lot of changes on a single at a time, because you can lose track of that. Test your rule before saving the changes. Previously, let me go back a couple of slides. I didn't mention, but here you will have a blue link that says test rule. It means that the application or path that I set up right here, if I click the test rule, it will look into the investigate data, and it will tell me if I have seen that behavior before. So that's how you test before launching or before applying that rule. Michael will talk more about that in a couple of minutes. Review and investigate alerts. This is very important. Never try to apply a rule blindly. Always review and always try to understand the alerts. On the alert triage, you have a lot of information that will help you to understand what was causing the alert. It's most of the times this is overseen, and it's important to that. Avoid bypass when you're setting off permissions. You don't want to lose visibility. Allow and log is my recommendation. And if you need to bypass some application, it's better to add it to a whitelist trusted apps. And with that said, Michael, we're coming to you.
Thanks, Ivan. All right. Let me share my screen. And I want to make sure that everybody can see my screen. Ivan.
Yes, sir. We can see it.
All right. So this is the fun part. This is where the devil's in the details. And this is also where the rubber meets the road, is in policies. And I absolutely love policies. So I want to expand upon what Ivan talked about in general. Now, by default, VMware Carbon Black has a different policy description for monitored, standard, and advanced. I like to be a little bit more prescriptive. So you'll see in my general tab for monitored that I get very verbose. Hey, monitor only, no prevention. Here is where you should use those policies. And I get extremely granular. And you'll also see that in advanced. Hey, this is a strong defense, and I absolutely go into the details. Now, part of policy best practice is not changing the default policy itself. Going ahead and, as an example, saying, hey, monitored version 2. Now, in my case, I actually tell you exactly what it is. This is similar to monitored, but I made a few changes. I turned on local scan and set prevention to on, to only known. That way it's still very unobtrusive. So I absolutely get into the details of this. Now, to a polling question, and I know that Ivan talked about it. You know, during the day as an admin, you're in here and you're looking at things, and you may even be making changes. Obviously, follow change management policy is best practice, and make sure you work within your windows. But nonetheless, when you go to make a change and you say, hey, I'm going to click on this. And you know what? Before I actually hit confirm and save it and actually roll it out to my endpoints, you know, I'd like to see what it's going to affect. So I can come down here to test rule. Now, it just so happens that there is no machines or policies or anything where this would affect. But if it did, it would say, hey, if you make this change, it's going to affect these 5 machines. And then you can actually click and look and see what those 5 machines are. So when you see CEO, CIO, CISO, and you see all, you know, human resources, yeah, you know what? I probably shouldn't make that change. And we'll look at this later. So it's little things like that that you can take advantage of, you know, that separates our product from others, is being able to test that rule before you roll it out, and you know exactly who it's going to affect. Now, I want to talk about, you know, this is where we can have some fun. And this actually came up with an actual large enterprise customer. So you'll see that I've created 2 policies. One of these policies is called termination. And let's go to general. And I actually tell you about this policy. Hey, this policy is designed to render an endpoint unusable for an end user. So, hey, we've got a meeting set up with HR and management at 2 o'clock with said employee, and basically they're going to be terminated. So we don't want the employee to be able to go in and, you know, take information and do various tasks. So this is a policy that you can implement. And then I even tell you, I even give you a note, hey, if HR meets with that employee and for whatever reason they're given a second chance and they're allowed to continue, then you can simply just put them back into whatever policy they came from, and everything is fine. But let's start to look at some of those details for this termination policy. So when you come into prevention, you'll see that I block access to unapproved USB devices. We don't want the employee plugging in devices and potentially taking data. That would be PI. There are other things as far as sensor options that you would want to take a look at, such as enabling the private logging level. and you can click on the question mark and it'll give you more details. And basically, this will give me the details of fully qualified domain names, URLs, any command lines that will run, arguments, file names, user. This gives me a lot of information and data that I may need and want. So this would be a policy that you would actually put someone into, prior to termination. Their machine still runs, it still does everything as usual, but you'll notice the note that I have up here. Please contact HR immediately. So obviously that could or could not be an indication. Now, because we're in information technology, we all know those IT guys are much more savvy with what they can do and how they can do it. So I created another policy that's terminate with prejudice. And you actually see that, hey, I bold advanced kill endpoint functionality policy. Reach out to the security team with any questions and concerns. And obviously you can change this message to say whatever you want. There's not too much difference under the sensor tab besides really what is seen, but the real details is in prevention. Now you'll notice that everything is at terminate. Now there is a deny down here. Well, there isn't a deny down here. Everything's terminate versus a deny, and versus being granular. So this is the top level versus getting granular with various pieces and parts. So you're applying this terminate process to everything. So some of the interesting pieces of this, cancel, is down here under the application paths. So things like service host, NTOS kernel, WinIT, DLL host, SMSS, task manager, NT kernel, services, Explorer. Okay. Now, in the old days, Carbon Black would allow you to have different application paths. So I would have an application path section, and then I could have another application path section that would allow me to basically separate typical from, hey, what I'm adding. But the newer Carbon Black console loops all those applications, into one section. And notice the process is terminate. So what does terminate with prejudice means? Well, I actually say it under the general tab. This policy is designed to render an endpoint useless, as it will cause irreversible corruption to the OS. This is basically going to cause the machine to blue screen. There isn't going to be likely ability to fix that issue. So it would obviously have to be re-imaged. And I even put that in the note. Hey, this policy, you're going to have to re-image an endpoint to fix this. Unlike the termination policy, where I actually say, hey, if you want to restore this user back to where things were, all you got to do is switch them into another policy and you're fine. So it doesn't do extensive, what I'm going to call extensive, damage. However, the terminate with prejudice does. And again, it will cause a Windows machine to blue screen. Now, I have looked at for the customer on creating a similar policy with regards to Mac. And one of the big differences with Mac, if you don't know this already, is the / and the /. So that gives you some indication of whether it's Windows or Mac and so forth. So something to keep in mind. Obviously, you've been IT long enough, you understand that you have to have services, Explorer, you have to have NTOS kernel, WinIT. These are all things that are, necessary. And in fact, you know what? I just noticed that I left out a backward slash in this policy. So this is, again, where the rubber meets the road. This is where you can really get granular, where other products are just a simple offer on type of capability. And so this was actually in response to some things a enterprise customer was doing. And so I created these two policies, and they still use these policies today. There are some other policies and other things that you can do. And this is where an IT person can get away with it. So if you say, hey, I'm not going to allow you to use taskmanager.exe, they can actually basically say, okay, I'm going to take notepad.exe and I'm going to actually run the task manager. And so that's why a policy like this will absolutely render that endpoint useless. So these are two policies that a lot of people don't think about. Now, you could absolutely, I know a customer that actually created a policy for employees that are traveling international. And so when they are traveling internationally, they're put into a certain policy that requires certain things and restricts other things. And so you can do amazing things with policies. And like I said, policies are really where the rubber meets the road. This is where you can really impact your environment in a positive way and achieve the results that you want. Now, a lot of customers do have a standard Windows group policy that sometimes they can put employees that are going to be terminated into. But if they don't, or if you don't, then you can certainly create your own policy that will do that. And as you can tell, both policies, I have USB blocking that will prevent users from getting into that. Do we have any more polling questions?
It seems like there's one, Michael. David is asking, what if you want to be able to analyze the data on an endpoint after the employee has left the business with the terminate prejudice? It's in the question.
So yeah, I see that. So that's a great question. So what you have to remember is, it's not deleting or removing any information. It's just making the operating system unusable. So all the log files and all the logging is still there. So you would have to go into that to be able to look at those details. So you can still do that. Does that answer your question? Obviously, if you're not familiar with command line or being able to access the various locations from a Windows standpoint, those would be things you need to look at. But the information is still there. Again, it doesn't corrupt or change or anything of the data itself. It's just you lose the GUI. Policies, well, I'm thinking about, policies are basically the unsung hero. They look at, I know we're supposed to keep things simple, but also from the standpoint, you need to be able to use policies to, make sure that you dictate certain things in your environment and not other things. And so this is where you can be, I'm going to say, controlling with what you do with policies. Think about it like security. Some people, there's that gray area. Some people say, oh, I have a really secure environment. I require 20 character passwords. Well, they're so long that employees write them on yellow sticky notes and stick it underneath their keyboard or hide it somewhere on their desk. So that's really not secure. But they think they're secure because they made you do 20 characters. So the same applies here. Common sense, keeping things simple. But as you can tell, there's pretty much anything that you can do with regards to policies. in your environment, whether it's traveling internationally, whether it's by department, whether it's by state, geo, territory, even power users. Power users are those employees that, they definitely understand more than the average user. And so they should be able to do some more things. And maybe you want to allow that. So you can create an actual power users policy that gives them the capability to do some additional things.
I think there's more questions, but we can wrap this up. And it looks like it came another one. Does Carbon Black policies work with firewall rules, or will one override the other? The only control that we have right now with Carbon Black policies is to allow a process to open or not communications. It's binary. It's yes, a process can open communications, or no, it cannot. We do not control the ports, or if it's inbound or outbound, but or any protocol. It works independently. Yeah.
And the next question with regards to swapping policy of an endpoint. So for the sake of argument, I will go ahead and share my screen one more time. And when you come into the inventory of your endpoints, you can actually select your endpoint, and then you have different actions, and you can change policy. And so that's how you would change policy.
One other thing, Michael, that I would like to add is like,
sure.
If you click the change policy button just to show something right there, remember you can create groups, and you can, if you have groups, you will have the option to automatic apply that policy. So unless you set up that policy manually, it will take the policy that applies to the group this system falls in. So it's a good way to keep a healthier and more clean management. But yeah, I mean, groups help to improve the management. Okay, I believe those are all the questions that we have. Now, also would like to hear your feedback. What other topics do you want to talk about? And also, we have additional resources. We have the Carbon Black, the VMware Learning site with the Carbon Black path. We have the Insurance and Security Privacy Services. We have also the BMOX and the Carbon Black community. There's a lot of information over there in User Exchange that you can access. So it's a good way to start. And also remember that in your Carbon Black console, in the help button in the top of your screen, you will have access to the user guide. Excellent. Well, thank you very much. We really appreciate your participation. Michael, any final message you want to give?
I don't. I appreciate everyone attending, and definitely go out there and go through your policies, and definitely be magical with it.